Hold on. Officer Lee shouted. There are only a limited number of harpoons. We'll survive after a while. Before anyone could reply, they heard another scream. He turned around and saw Tian Tian. She was not as lucky as Zhao Ran. The piercing harpoon pierced her palm. Tian Tian lost her strength for a moment. The table in front of him was knocked upside down by the whistling harpoon. Be careful. Chao Jiajin gritted his teeth and reached out to grab the table in front of Tian Tian. In this gap, a harpoon flew inaccurately through the gap. It pierced through Han Yimou's shoulder. Han Yimou screamed in pain, but his hand was still tightly gripping the table. Don't panic. Officer Lee reached out to hold Han Yimou and spread his hands apart. He held up half the table for him. Chao Jiajin also made a prompt decision and reached out to hold the table for Tian Tian. Fortunately, these two people are very strong. The entire formation began to stabilize again as the crash died down. Only then did everyone understand how reasonable this formation was, according to what Officer Lee and Dr. Zhao think. If the tables are placed in a staggered position and held by everyone, then the table and harpoon are vertical and extremely easy to penetrate. Now the mushrooming shape will make the contact surface between the harpoon and the table plate in all 5 directions become inclined. The penetration force of the harpoon drops dramatically, especially if it's a harpoon coming directly from above at this moment. Due to the conical characteristics, they changed their travel routes after a while. There was no sound outside the table. Is it over? Han Yimou gritted his teeth and asked. Wait a minute. Qi Shaya replied. Everyone raised their tables and waited quietly for another minute. He realized that there was indeed no movement outside. Chao Jiajin carefully opened a gap and looked outside. I lost. He was instantly stunned by the scene in front of him. Everyone slowly moved the table away. He found that the ground and table were almost full of harpoons, and the 2 corpses on the ground were even worse at this moment. They were like 2 hedgehogs, densely packed with thorns. Each harpoon is connected by a rope. The other end of the rope was connected to the hole in the wall. At this moment, the room was in chaos. Dr. Zhao immediately rolled up his sleeves and walked to Han Yimou's side. His condition is not encouraging. The harpoon went through his shoulder and needed immediate attention. Han Yimou slowly sat down. A wry smile. Just now I was wondering if I would be so unlucky. I didn't expect to be hit. Tian Tian looked guilty and apologized to Han Yimou, but everyone knew that this was not Tian Tian's problem. She was also stabbed in the palm with a harpoon. Hey, pretty girl. Come here. Chao Jia waved vigorously. I can wrap it for you. Huh? Tian Tian was stunned. You know how to bandage. Zhao Zhao knows a little. Chao Jiajin tore off a piece of suit cloth from the dead goat head and tore the cloth into 2 pieces. A tight tie around Sweet's arm to stop the bleeding. The other was carefully wrapped around the wound. I used to get hurt a lot when I was on the street, so I learned some bandaging myself. Chao Jiajin said. Tian Tian nodded slightly and did not say anything after arriving here. Everyone was rarely quiet. It was as if he had temporarily escaped from the shadow of death, but there were still no doors around the damn room. Still trapped them. What the hell is this place? What's outside the room? In less than a minute, a sigh came from Dr. Zhao's direction. Qi Shaya turned around and looked. Dr. Zhao, who was treating Han Yimou's wound, looked troubled. What's the matter? Officer Lee asked. Are you seriously injured? The injuries aren't serious. Dr. Zhao shook his head. I just can't get the harpoon off. Everyone moved closer and realized that the problem was indeed very troublesome. The tip of the harpoon is a barb. Pulling it out will cause more damage to the injured, and the harpoon's tail was attached to a rope. At this moment, Han Yimou was like a fish that had been shot. No matter where he swam, he would be held tightly by this rope. Had to cut the rope and pull the harpoon out the front. Dr. Zhao raised his head and said, But I don't have any sharp weapons with me. Han Yimou's lips were a little white at the moment. The harpoon pierced his shoulder blade and made him miserable. Use another harpoon, Officer Lee said decisively. Although the harpoon is sharp, it is still a sharp weapon. This is the only way. Dr. Zhao nodded. Ryder, I want you to choose the most relaxed position and lie down. We need to cut the rope on your back. Take your time, pay attention to your harpoon in front of you. Be careful not to get hurt twice. Han Yimo nodded and began to move his body with difficulty. Qi Shaya felt a little out of place watching the scene slow down. Is there really time for them to do that on this occasion? He looked at the ropes all over the floor. An ominous premonition appeared in his mind. If they're right, they're still racing against time. You can't slow down, Qi Shaya suddenly said. Take the harpoon off him immediately. He walked quickly to the doctor and hold on. He said to Han Yimo seriously. I'll pull out the harpoon for you right now. Han Yimo was confused. But he didn't reject her. What are you doing? Dr. Zhao pushed Qi Shaya angrily. You'll aggravate his injuries like this. There's no time. If we delay any longer, he will really die. Qi Shaya pushed Dr. Zhao away and grabbed the harpoon on Han Yimo's back from behind. A scream rang out. Barbed harpoons penetrate easily. It's even harder to get it off. Hey! Officer Li also ran over at this moment. He pulled Qi Shaya away and shouted angrily. Are you trying to kill someone? Qi Shaya was stopped twice. And his expression turned ugly. I understand that you want to save people, but if we don't hurry, the harpoon will before Qi Shaya could finish. The chains around them rang again. It was as if some huge mechanism had been activated again. Han Yimo's heart-wrenching screams followed only then did. Everyone regained their senses. He found that all the harpoons were slowly being pulled back under the rope. Han Yimo, who was on the ground, was also being dragged by a huge force. Qi Shaya had noticed this a long time ago. The harpoon rope wasn't just for show. They'd take it back sooner or later. Everyone ran after Han Yimo in a panic. During this time, Officer Li tried to pull on the rope. It was futile to resist the enormous power between the black holes. The table, full of harpoons, was now being torn apart by harpoons. They also began to retreat gradually. This kind of power that could tear apart wooden boards was definitely not something that could be countered with bare hands. Although Han Yimo was in excruciating pain, he soon discovered another problem. If you're pulled against a wall and still doesn't break free of the harpoon, the whole person will be firmly nailed to the wall and wait for death. Thinking of this, he stood up in pain. He grabbed Qi Shaya again and said word by word, help me get the harpoon. Take it down now.